Diving into the heart of Pennsylvania's chocolate country, you'll notice something extraordinary perched atop a commanding hillside. It's a structure that belongs to another era entirely, a monument to the Gilded Age, when industrial titans built noble mansions that rivaled European castles. This is High Point, a name that once promised everything and delivered only echoes. Unlike the forgotten mansions that litter the American landscape, here's what makes this historic building different from every other gilded manor you've ever heard about. It wasn't abandoned because the money ran out. It was abandoned because the heart that gave it life stopped beating. This is the story of how one of America's wealthiest men, Milton Hershey, built paradise from chocolate money for the woman he loved, only to watch it transform into the most expensive tomb in Pennsylvania. And he died in a hospital with her picture still in his pocket. A Gilded Age dream, sweetened by chocolate and haunted by loss. It leaves behind a question that haunts every Gilded Age mansion. What happens when the people who gave a house meaning are gone? If you love deep dives into America's untold history of old money and Gilded Age mansions, hit the subscribe button to support this work. Your subscription helps the channel grow and lets us keep making these documentaries. Also, don't forget to drop a comment on which mansion we should explore next. To understand why this forgotten mansion, though physically preserved, became emotionally abandoned, we need to travel back to a moment of absolute despair, to a luxury hotel room in Philadelphia, where champagne spilled across Persian carpets and dreams shattered like crystal on hardwood floors. Part 1. The hotel room, where everything ended. On a warm evening, March 25, 1915, the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, Philadelphia. 7th floor, suite of rooms that cost more per night than most Americans earned in a month. Outside, late winter battles with early spring, wet snow turning to cold rain, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and won't let go. Inside, the air is thick with expensive tobacco smoke and something else, something metallic and terrible that no amount of luxury can mask. This is the smell of death arriving ahead of schedule. On a wide mahogany bed, imported from France, lies a woman whose beauty had once turned heads in the finest restaurants of New York and Paris. Catherine Sweeney Hershey, just 42 years old, wife to one of the richest men in the United States. But her skin has taken on that peculiar waxy quality that doctors of the era called facies hippocratica, the face of Hippocrates, the mask of approaching death. Beside her, rigid on a straight-backed chair, sits Milton Snavely Hershey. His net worth at this moment could be calculated at approximately $60 million. Convert that to modern currency, and you're looking at well over $1.5 billion. He owns a town. He employs thousands. His name appears on products and shops from Maine to California. He has built an empire from cocoa beans and fresh milk. But right now, in this hushed room with its heavy drapes and its doctors standing uselessly in the corner, all of that means precisely nothing. The only sound is Catherine's breathing, labored, irregular, each breath a small victory against the disease that's been consuming her nervous system for years. The doctors call it nervous exhaustion or ataxia when speaking to the family. Among themselves, they're more honest. It's a progressive degenerative condition, and early 20th century medicine has no answer for it. They can only watch and wait. Milton Hershey, this man who solved problems through sheer force of will and capital, who turned failure into success through relentless determination, sits with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles have gone white. He is watching the only person he ever truly loved disappear before his eyes, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing, his money can do about it. Catherine's eyes flutter open. Her voice, once full of laughter and Irish melody, comes out as barely a whisper. She wants champagne. It's an odd request, inappropriate even, for a woman so close to death. But Milton explodes into action as if she'd asked for the moon, and he believed he could actually deliver it. He rushes into the hallway, barking orders at hotel staff. Get the best champagne. Get it now. Get a proper glass. If he'd had the time, he would have bought every vineyard in France if he thought it would make her smile. One more time. 3 minutes. That's all it takes. 3 minutes to find the wine, to prepare the glass, to let the bubbles rise in the crystal. 3 minutes that feel like 3 hours and 3 seconds all at once. Milton returns to the room holding a fogged glass of sparkling wine, droplets of condensation running down its sides like tears. He steps through the doorway expecting to see her eyes, waiting to see her lips curve into that smile that first captured him decades ago in a confectionery shop in upstate New York. But the room has changed. The quality of silence has shifted from tense to absolute. Catherine's breathing has stopped. The doctors have lowered their heads. The fight is over. Milton freezes in the doorway, this titan of industry, this builder of cities frozen like a statue. The glass slips from his fingers. In the terrible quiet, the sound of crystal shattering against parquet flooring rings out like a gunshot in a cathedral. Champagne spreads across the floor, soaking into the expensive Persian carpet, thousands of bubbles dying against imported wool. Catherine Sweeney Hershey is dead, and with her dies something essential in the man who built an empire just to be worthy of her love. At that precise moment, 150 kilometers away in the town that bears his name, the High Point Mansion stands on its hill, like a lighthouse waiting for a ship that will never return home. The servants inside are polishing silver, washing windows, preparing for their mistress's homecoming. They don't yet know that their mistress will never cross that threshold again. They don't yet know that the house they're maintaining is about to transform from a home into a mausoleum. 22 rooms of carefully chosen furniture and lovingly designed spaces. A limestone facade that catches the morning sun. Huge windows that look out over the smoking chimneys of the chocolate factory below. Gardens planned to rival anything Catherine saw during their travels through Europe. All of it waiting. All of it about to become a monument to absence. This is where the story of High Point truly begins. Not in its construction, but in its transformation from a palace of dreams into a prison of memory. But to understand the full weight of this tragedy, to comprehend why Milton Hershey will make decisions in the coming years that baffle business partners and confound economists, we need to understand the journey that brought him to this moment. We need to understand the poverty he clawed his way out of, the failures that nearly destroyed him, the persistence that saved him, and the love that transformed him from a mere businessman into something approaching a king. We need to travel back to 1857 to a world of mud and manual labor, religious severity, and paternal failure, to understand how a man builds a paradise on earth only to find himself trapped in it, alone. Part 2. Born into Mud and Doctrine. September 13th, 1857. Central Pennsylvania, a rural crossroads called Derry Church. This is not picturesque countryside. This is hard country. Endless mud when it rains, choking dust when it doesn't, back-breaking labor every day, and the stern, unyielding faces of the Mennonites who believe that pleasure borders on sin and progress threatens piety. Into this world of restriction and struggle, Milton Snavely Hershey enters, and from his very first breath, he is caught in a war between two opposing philosophies that will shape everything he becomes. On one side stands his mother, Fanny Snavely Hershey. She comes from a relatively wealthy Mennonite family, people who accumulated land and money through discipline and denial. Fanny wears the modest cap of her faith, economizes on everything down to matches and candle stubs, and believes only in what she can touch with her own two hands, land, currency, and biblical truth. For Fanny, life is suffering followed by accumulation, and any deviation from this formula is dangerous weakness. On the other side stands his father, Henry Hershey, and if ever there was a man designed to frustrate the philosophy of accumulation, it's Henry. He is a dreamer, a schemer, a man perpetually convinced that the easy fortune lies just over the next hill. He plants orchards, but lacks the patience to wait for harvest. He drills for oil when everyone else rushes toward gold. He grows berries when the market demands grain. He is a walking manual on how to lose everything, repeatedly, creatively, spectacularly. The family moves constantly, fleeing debts and Henry's broken promises. Little Milton grows up in the epicenter of this domestic battlefield, his mother demanding stability and his father demanding risk. The irony that will define Milton's life is that he inherits traits from both. From Fanny, an iron discipline and pathological hatred of waste. From Henry, an almost supernatural ability to see opportunities that others miss entirely. His formal education ends in 4th grade. This detail matters. Milton Hershey, future industrial magnate and builder of a model city, can barely write a grammatically correct sentence. At 14, his father arranges an apprenticeship at a printing shop. Henry envisions his son becoming an intellectual, a newspaper editor, someone who works with his mind rather than his hands. Milton hates it. He hates the smell of ink, the tedious typesetting, the indoor gloom of the print shop. In what becomes his first act of rebellion, he commits an act of sabotage. He deliberately drops his hat into the printing press machinery, breaking expensive equipment. He's fired in disgrace, and Henry's dreams of an intellectual son die with a crunch of metal and torn fabric. Fanny takes control. She arranges for Milton to work with a local confectioner named Joseph Royer. Among the vanilla and burnt sugar, standing over copper kettles of boiling syrup, Milton Hershey has an epiphany. This is his language. Candy isn't just food, it's currency that crosses all barriers of class and education. It's joy made tangible. Everyone understands sweetness, but understanding what you want to do and actually succeeding at it are separated by an ocean of failure, and Milton is about to drown in that ocean repeatedly. Part 3. Serial Failure. 1. Philadelphia is celebrating the centennial of American independence with a World's Fair. The city hums with optimism and opportunity. 19-year-old Milton Hershey, armed with confidence and borrowed money from his Aunt Mattie Snavely, opens his first candy shop. He works 16-hour days. He makes candy through the night and sells it during the day. He pours every ounce of energy he has into this venture, and he makes a catastrophic mistake he can't count. His expenses exceed his income from day one. He's optimistic where he should be, realistic, generous where he should be calculating. 6 years of grinding labor, 6 years of hope, 6 years that end in bankruptcy. The Snavely family is furious. Their money has vanished into Milton's failed dream. He's become exactly what they feared. Another Henry Hershey, another dreamer who squanders family resources on schemes that collapse. Even his mother looks at him with something approaching pity, mixed with contempt. Milton flees Philadelphia in disgrace. He heads west to Denver, Colorado, chasing his father who's involved in yet another doomed venture involving silver mines. And in Denver, among miners and mountain dust, something important happens. Milton gets a job with a local confectioner and learns a secret unknown in the East: the use of fresh milk in caramel production. Fresh milk makes the caramel softer, more palatable, and extends its shelf life. This is a genuine technological revelation in candy making. Emboldened by this knowledge, Milton moves to Chicago. Failure. He tries New Orleans. Failure. He ends up in New York City, 1883. He borrows money again. At this point, It requires tremendous faith from any lender because his track record is nothing but losses. He opens a caramel production facility. Business starts promisingly, then reality intrudes. His delivery wagon breaks down during a heat wave, melting expensive inventory. Competitors undercut his prices. The police confiscate his equipment for unpaid debts. At age 29, Milton Hershey returns to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, looking like a defeated man. His relatives literally cross the street to avoid talking to him. He is the family disgrace, the cautionary tale, another Henry Hershey who burned through family money on empty promises. But in this moment of absolute humiliation, at this point of total zero, Milton forms the philosophy that will become the foundation of everything he builds. He understands that talent doesn't matter. Luck doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the ability to rise one more time than you fall. He stops being a dreamer and becomes a calculator of survival. He borrows what will be his last chance, money from a former employee who takes pity on him. There is no room for error this time. Failure here means permanent failure, the kind you never recover from. He starts making caramel using that Denver recipe with fresh milk. He names the operation the Lancaster Caramel Company. He lives in a single room with his mother and aunt. During daylight hours, he makes caramel. At night, he personally loads crates. He cuts every possible corner while maintaining quality. And suddenly, miraculously, it works. An English importer samples his caramel and places an enormous order, the kind of order that can make or break a small operation. Milton takes out a loan against this order, risking everything on the bet that he can deliver. His banker thinks he's insane, but Milton delivers the order. The check clears. Money flows in. By the early 1890s, Milton Hershey is a millionaire. His Crystal A caramel is sold internationally. He has won. He has proved to everyone who doubted him that he is not his father. He has built a successful enterprise. He has money, respect, social standing. But for Milton Hershey, this is not enough. He's achieved what most men only dream of, and he finds himself unsatisfied, looking for the next horizon. Part 4. The German Machines and the Red-Haired Girl. 1893, Chicago World's Fair. Milton Hershey walks through the vast exhibition halls, a successful businessman inspecting the innovations of the age. In the German pavilion, he sees something that makes his heart race: massive machines for producing chocolate. Chocolate in this era is an elite product, a luxury available primarily to wealthy Europeans. The Swiss guard their production secrets jealously. The process is complex, expensive, and requires specialized knowledge that Americans simply don't possess. Milton stares at the dark, viscous mass flowing from the German machinery and makes a decision that his business partners will consider absolute madness. He turns to them and says, "Caramel is just a fad. Chocolate is forever." He purchases the German equipment right there at the exhibition, arranging for it to be shipped to Pennsylvania. His plan is audacious to the point of lunacy. He wants to sell his successful caramel company and bet everything on a product that virtually no one in America knows how to mass produce. This isn't just business strategy. This is obsession. Milton has a vision. He wants to democratize luxury. He wants to take a product that only the wealthy can afford and make it accessible to working-class families. He wants a nickel to buy a chocolate bar, not just a piece of hard candy. But to accomplish this, he needs more than factory equipment. He needs more than capital. He needs something to give meaning to this relentless drive for more. He needs someone to build this empire for. Enter Catherine Sweeney, though everyone calls her Kitty. The year is 1898, Jamestown, New York. The air smells of confectioner's glaze and social change. This is where two completely different worlds collide, altering the trajectory of Milton Hershey's life forever. Until this moment, Milton has been a stereotypical product of his upbringing: stern, dressed in conservative gray suits, living by the clock and the ledger. He's 40 years old, a confirmed bachelor. His mother, Fanny, has constructed a protective cocoon of Mennonite asceticism around her son. In her worldview, a wife represents an unnecessary complication, a distraction from the serious business of accumulating wealth. But Catherine "Kitty" Sweeney is the antithesis of everything Milton has known. She's 26, Irish, Catholic, and works in a confectionery shop. In the rigid social hierarchy of late 19th century Pennsylvania, this potential union isn't just unlikely, it's scandalous. A Protestant industrialist and the daughter of working-class Irish Catholics, it's a combination that respectable society simply doesn't permit. Yet Milton Hershey, this man who built his fortune on calculating risks, commits the most irrational act of his life. On May 25, 1898, they marry secretly in New York at the rectory of St. Patrick's Cathedral. No lavish ceremony, no society reporters, no Mennonite relatives glowering from the pews. This is an act of intimate rebellion against every expectation of his class and upbringing. Kitty's presence in Milton's life creates a visible transformation. People who've known him for years notice remarkable changes. The stern businessman begins to smile spontaneously. He replaces his old-fashioned suits with more elegant attire. For the first time in his life, he starts spending money not just on machines and inventory, but on experiences: theaters, travel, fine dining. Kitty brings color into his monochrome world. She loves cut flowers, musical performances, sophisticated conversation. She becomes his only window into emotional life, into realms of human experience that had been completely boarded up since childhood. This emotional awakening pushes Milton toward his greatest strategic gamble. Part 5. Selling Paradise to Build Paradise. August 10, 1900. Milton Hershey executes a move that makes Wall Street financiers choke on their morning coffee and question his sanity. He sells his Golden Goose, the Lancaster Caramel Company, to his main competitor, the American Caramel Company, for $1 million. To understand the scale of this transaction, consider that the average American worker earns about $450 annually. Milton receives a sum that would take an ordinary person 2,200 years to earn through wages. His competitors celebrate. They believe they've eliminated Milton Hershey from the board, that he'll retire to some mansion, buy a yacht, and spend his remaining years sailing around Europe with his young wife. But they've missed a crucial detail in the contract. Milton has retained all rights to produce chocolate. He hasn't left the game. He's simply shed weight to build a rocket. Caramel is just a fad, he tells his lawyers, repeating the conviction that first seized him in Chicago. Chocolate is forever. Now he possesses $1 million in Kitty, but he has no factory and no land. He needs both, and he needs them in a location that will give him competitive advantage. Milton returns to the place he once fled in poverty, Derry Church, the backwater where he was born in dirt and Mennonite severity. But his logic is flawless and ruthless. To mass-produce milk chocolate, he requires enormous quantities of fresh milk. In cities, milk spoils quickly and costs dearly. In Derry Church, thousands of dairy cows graze on green hills, and clean water flows abundantly from limestone springs. In 1903, the greatest construction project in Pennsylvania begins. But Milton isn't just building a factory. He's constructing a utopia. He's seen the industrial slums of England, the blackened row houses, the workers packed into disease-ridden tenements, the children with rickets and consumption. He hates everything about that model. He decides that his workers will live not in barracks, but in brick houses with front lawns and indoor plumbing. This is pragmatic altruism. A happy, healthy worker produces more and better work. But the crown jewel of this new world won't be the factory, impressive as it is. The jewel will be the house for Kitty. Milton hires architect C. Emlyn Urban with a task that's simultaneously simple and grandiose. Build a mansion that will symbolize their triumph over poverty, over social disapproval, over every obstacle they've faced. Build something that announces to the world that a boy born in a Mennonite farmhouse has conquered an industry. The location is chosen with strategic precision, the top of a hill with an unobstructed view of the factory under construction. The spot is called High Point, and the name contains multitudes of meaning. This is where architectural psychology begins. High Point isn't conceived as a palace for lavish parties like Jay Gatsby's fictional estate. It's designed as a fortress for two people who found each other against all odds and against all social pressure. Part 6. Building the Gilded Cage. In 1905, the factory begins production, and for the first time in American history, milk chocolate becomes a mass-market product. A Hershey's bar costs 5 cents, affordable for working families. This is revolution disguised as candy. Money flows into Milton's accounts faster than it can be properly counted. Simultaneously, the walls of High Point rise stone by stone. 22 rooms. A limestone facade in the colonial revival style. A massive veranda wrapping around 3 sides of the structure. Milton wants Kitty to feel like royalty. He plans gardens that will eclipse anything she saw during their European travels. But while construction workers lay parquet flooring and install stained glass, the first invisible crack appears in the foundation of this seemingly perfect life. Kitty begins experiencing fatigue. At first, this is dismissed as acclimatization to the Pennsylvania climate, or perhaps stress from the massive construction project. But then her hands begin trembling periodically. She loses her balance on level ground. Small, troubling symptoms that Milton, absorbed in the factory launch, tries not to notice. He attempts to buy his way out of worry, more gifts, better doctors. He convinces himself that fresh country air, the luxury of the new house, and freedom from everyday concerns will cure whatever ails her. He builds High Point not just as a home, but as a gilded cage where he hopes to hide their happiness from the cruelty of fate. The mansion's design reflects the merger of two sensibilities. The massive wooden panels of oak and chestnut represent Milton, reliability, strength, earthbound solidity. The stained glass windows, Tiffany lamps, and elegant Art Nouveau furniture represent Kitty, color, lightness, dreams. Money from a Mennonite combining with the aesthetic sensibilities of an Irish Catholic creates a unique hybrid. In 1908, construction completes. The structure is monumental, standing on its hill like a watchtower. Below, factory chimneys smoke continuously, producing tons of chocolate daily. Above, there is silence and luxury. Milton and Kitty move into their new home. On the surface, the dream has materialized. They have love, unlimited resources, and a house that inspires envy throughout the state. But when the massive oak doors of High Point close behind them, they find themselves alone, with a problem that no amount of money can solve. The house is too quiet. The nurseries that architect Urban included in his plans remain empty year after year. Kitty's condition, initially dismissed as minor, begins revealing its true nature. Her walk becomes increasingly unsteady. The magnificent staircase, designed for graceful descents, becomes a daily challenge. The great strategist Milton Hershey has constructed the perfect kingdom, but the queen for whom everything was created is beginning to fade before his eyes, and all his millions cannot slow her decline by even a single day. Part 7. Architecture of Silence. To understand Milton Hershey's psychology during this period, you must not just look at High Point, you must look out from it. The house's placement isn't accidental. Architect Urban designed the structure so that the main facade faces directly toward the chocolate factory below. This is architectural embodiment of control and surveillance. Every morning, stepping onto the veranda with his coffee, Milton doesn't see mere landscape. He sees smoking factory chimneys, railroad tracks carrying his products to national markets, thousands of workers heading to their machines at shift change. His house is the bridge of a ship. His factory is the ship itself. Between them runs an unbreakable umbilical cord of ambition and industry. The construction cost of the building itself, $53,433. With furniture, landscaping, and interior decoration, the total rises to approximately $100,000. Converted to modern economy, we're discussing millions. But here's a more telling comparison. For that sum, Milton could have constructed an entire neighborhood of workers' housing. He spent it on one house, on one woman. Why? Because this house represents the only gift he can give to someone who has everything except the one thing that matters, her health. Step inside. The first impression for any guest crossing the threshold isn't gold leaf or marble columns. It's light and air. Unlike the heavy, suffocating Victorian mansions of the era where each room exists as an isolated cell, the first floor of High Point employs what we'd now call an open floor plan. The entrance hall flows seamlessly into the living room, which connects to the dining room without doors or heavy partitions. There are no architectural secrets here, no hidden spaces. This represents a direct challenge to Milton's childhood spent in cramped, dark rooms, saturated with poverty's fear. Here, walls are pushed outward. Here, you can breathe deeply. The interior represents a dialogue between two personalities. Massive oak and chestnut paneling speaks Milton's language: reliability, permanence, earth. The stained glass, the delicate Tiffany lamps, the sinuous Art Nouveau furniture speaks Kitty's language: color, lightness, aspiration. 22 rooms, electricity in every corner, a rare luxury in 1908. Bathrooms with modern plumbing, a kitchen with advanced refrigeration. Milton, fascinated by technology, has transformed the house into a machine optimized for comfortable living. But walk further, into the so-called palm room or winter garden. This is the house's heart. Glass walls on 3 sides, exotic plants carefully tended, wicker furniture arranged for intimate conversation. Kitty spends hours here, gazing at her beloved rose garden through the glass. This space was created for life, for laughter, for the sounds of children playing. Instead, it's permeated by a silence so profound it seems to have physical weight. Here we encounter High Point's central paradox. This house was designed for noise, for children's laughter echoing through hallways, for feet running up and down the grand staircase, for large receptions and dinner parties. The dining room can accommodate dozens of guests. The billiard room waits for loud groups of cigar-smoking men engaging in competitive banter. But historical records are merciless. There are almost never loud parties here. Milton and Kitty live in this enormous structure essentially alone, surrounded by a quiet staff of servants. Servants later recall that a culture of silence reigns in the house. Thick Persian carpets cover every floor, absorbing the sound of footsteps. Why? Because any sharp sound can trigger Kitty's migraines or nervous episodes. The house has become a golden isolation chamber. Protection from the outside world, but also separation from life's normal rhythms. Ascend the wide staircase to the second floor. Here, the architectural psychology shifts. If the first floor demonstrates success to visitors, the second floor is a private zone of struggle. Kitty's bedroom, Milton's bedroom, empty guest rooms that rarely host guests, and rooms that could have been, should have been, nurseries. Kitty's bedroom furniture was acquired during their European travels. A canopied bed, an ornate vanity covered with perfume bottles from Paris. But the more luxurious the surroundings become, the more obvious the tragedy. Mirrors reflect a woman who's fading. Fireplaces burning logs the size of small trees cannot warm her perpetually cold hands, a symptom of impaired circulation and progressive nervous system damage. Milton often sits in his office, surrounded by invoices and sales growth charts. Chocolate sales double year over year. His net worth grows geometrically. But every time he climbs those stairs to Kitty's bedroom, he feels utterly, completely powerless. The strongest contrast at High Point is sensory dissonance. Open a window and the sweet, cloying smell of chocolate floods into the room. The entire town smells of cocoa, the smell of money, the smell of success. But inside the house, behind closed windows, there's the smell of medicine and candle wax. Outside, at the hill's base, life bustles energetically. The factory operates 3 shifts. An amusement park, the future Hershey Park, is under construction. Schools, banks, stores rise from empty fields. Milton is creating the perfect city, a model community. But in the center of this city, at the highest point, stands a palace where time has stopped, where hope is slowly transforming into something darker. Part 8. The Biological Dead End. 1. Inside High Point, behind the massive mahogany desk in Milton's private office, a quiet but fundamental transformation occurs. The medical verdict is now clear, even if it's not discussed openly at dinner parties. Kitty's diagnosis in the medical terminology of the time is often listed as locomotor ataxia, a terrible, degenerative condition. It strips away coordination, causes piercing pain, and slowly murders the nervous system. But the cruelest consequence for the Hershey family isn't the physical suffering, it's biological finality, infertility. Milton Hershey, a man who built a factory capable of producing 50,000 pounds of chocolate daily, has hit an insurmountable wall. His bloodline will end with him. His empire, his millions, his entire town, there's no one to pass it to. The dynasty ends before it truly begins. Here we witness Milton's moral character in stark relief. Another oligarch in his position might have quietly divorced, found a younger mistress who could provide an heir. This was the accepted norm among industrial barons of the era. Respectable society looked the other way when powerful men made such arrangements. But Milton makes a choice that contradicts capitalist logic entirely. November 15, 1909, Milton and Kitty sign a document that will fundamentally alter the fate of their capital. They establish the Hershey Industrial School. At this time, the school has exactly 4 students, orphan boys, who, like Milton once did, possess nothing. They live not in a golden mansion, but in a nearby old farmhouse on the property where Milton himself was born, the homestead. This decision represents despair transformed into strategy. Kitty, understanding she will never become a mother, asks her husband, "Let's care for other people's children since we cannot have our own." Milton agrees, but there's a complex psychology beneath this gesture. He creates a system where he becomes father to hundreds, eventually thousands. He becomes a godlike figure to these boys. He clothes them, feeds them, educates them, but in return demands absolute discipline and obedience. He's building a family structured like a factory, efficient, controlled, productive. Meanwhile, death's shadow draws closer, sometimes manifesting in the most unexpected forms. Part 9. Ship that sank without them. April 1912. Nice, France. Milton and Kitty are spending winter on the Mediterranean coast, attempting to ease Kitty's suffering with mild climate. It's time to return to America. Milton, accustomed to the finest of everything, books a luxurious cabin on the most celebrated ocean liner of the age. He writes a check for $300, 10% of the deposit for a VIP suite. The ship's name? Titanic. Tickets are in hand, luggage is nearly packed, but at the last moment, plans change abruptly. The official version claims Milton was urgently called to business matters in the United States and had to depart earlier. But biographers and historians lean toward another explanation. Kitty's condition deteriorated so sharply that they couldn't wait for the Titanic's departure date. They changed tickets, sailing instead on the German liner America 3 days earlier, April 14th, 1912. While the America approaches New York's harbor, the Titanic collides with an iceberg and sinks to the ocean floor. Milton Hershey learns about the disaster upon landing. The uncashed check for $300 remains in the White Star Line's archives, a silent testimony to how thin the line between life and death can be. Fate spared him, but for what purpose? This incident strengthens Milton's sense of providentialism. He begins believing his life was spared for a higher purpose, that he survived to accomplish something significant. But this providential escape doesn't save Kitty. Her rescue from the icy Atlantic merely prolongs her suffering on land. Part 10. Final Years in the Golden Tomb. The period from 1912 to 1915 becomes a time of slow agony within High Point's walls. Kitty rarely leaves the house. Her legs give out. Her hands tremble so violently she cannot hold a teacup. Milton hires the best physicians money can procure. He sends her to expensive sanatoriums. But when medicine proves powerless, he turns to the language of symbols. Every single day, regardless of weather, he instructs gardeners to cut the finest roses from the greenhouse and bring them to Kitty's room. The house floods with flowers, an attempt to drown the smell of illness with the scent of living things. Neighbors and factory workers witness a strange spectacle: the powerful magnate whom competitors fear, sitting for hours beside his wife's bed, reading to her, or simply holding her hand. In these moments, he's not a businessman. He's just a helpless man watching his world dissolve. But there's another dimension to this tragedy. As Kitty fades, Milton's business experiences explosive growth. He expands product lines. He builds new facilities. He seems to sublimate his grief into concrete and steel. The weaker Kitty becomes, the stronger the Hershey Corporation grows. It's a cruel conservation of energy, life leaving the person and flowing into the system. By early 1915, doctors recommend a change of scenery. Pennsylvania winter is too harsh. Milton takes Kitty to Philadelphia, to the Bellevue Stratford Hotel, hoping city physicians can help, or at least ease her pain. They depart High Point. Servants cover living room furniture with white sheets. Windows are draped. The house plunges into darkness, as if sensing its mistress will never cross its threshold again. Milton, boarding the train to Philadelphia, looks back at his mansion on the hill. It resembles a fortress from this distance, but he knows it's actually the most vulnerable point on his entire map. All his millions, all his stocks, all his factories have shrunk to the size of one hotel room where his heart's fate is being decided. And then we return to where we began. March 1915. The circle closes. But now we understand the tragedy's true price. Kitty's death isn't just the loss of a wife. It's the loss of the only person who made Milton Hershey a living human being, rather than a function of capital accumulation. When her heart stops, something inside Milton breaks permanently. And this fracture will lead to the most grandiose and unexpected decision in American business history. Part 11. Preservation and Transformation. After Kitty's funeral in spring 1915, Milton Hershey returns to the house he built for her and does something psychologists would classify as pathological denial. He preserves time itself. He instructs the household staff to leave his wife's rooms completely untouched. Her dresses continue hanging in the closets, arranged exactly as she left them. Her hairbrush rests on the vanity at precisely the same angle. Her jewelry boxes remain open, displaying pieces she'll never wear again. Every single day, fresh roses are changed in her bedroom, as if she's merely stepped into the garden and will return at any moment. But the silence in the house becomes something you can almost touch. 22 rooms designed for the sounds of life now amplify the loneliness of one man. Milton wanders the corridors at night. Servants hear his footsteps on the carpeted floors, pacing like a sentry guarding something already lost. He cannot sleep. He's a workaholic who's suddenly lost his purpose. He used to earn money to impress her. He used to build enterprises to provide comfort for her. Now that the recipient is gone, what's the point of this giant money-making machine? Why does any of it matter? The outside world is simultaneously going mad. World War I rages across Europe. A global crisis destabilizes markets. Prices for sugar, the fundamental ingredient of his empire, skyrocket unpredictably. Any other capitalist in this situation would clutch his assets desperately, trying to preserve every cent against the storm. But Milton Hershey does the exact opposite. The tragedy triggers something like a psychological transformation. He begins viewing his wealth not as a reward, but as a heavy burden that must be cast off. He starts seeing his fortune as something that owns him rather than the reverse. Part 12. The Secret Gift That Changed Everything. November 13th, 1918. 3 years after his wife's death, and exactly 2 days after World War I ends, Milton summons his lawyers to his office. The meeting occurs in absolute secrecy. No press representatives, no photographers, no business partners. On the table lies a legal document, a deed of transfer of ownership. Milton Hershey takes a pen and commits perhaps the largest act of philanthropy in the history of private American business, up to that point. He transfers the entire package of common stock of the Hershey Chocolate Company to a trust fund established for a boarding school for orphans. Not a percentage, not a portion of profits, everything. Consider the mathematics. The transferred assets are valued at approximately $60 million. Converted to modern currency, that's a sum exceeding several billion. But what's truly shocking isn't the amount. It's the completeness of the transaction. From this second forward, the factory smoking beneath High Point's windows is no longer his. The land on which the town stands is no longer his. The brand name recognized across the nation is no longer his property. Legally, Milton Hershey, the creator of this empire, becomes a salaried manager working for orphans. Why would he do this? And why in secrecy? The world doesn't learn about this extraordinary act until 5 years later, when a journalist from the New York Times accidentally unearths the story while researching something completely different. When finally asked about his motives, Milton responds with characteristic dryness, without sentimentality, "I have no heirs. These boys are my sons now." Here we witness the final reinterpretation of Kitty's role in his life. She transforms from a tragic figure, a victim of disease, into the invisible architect of this monumental decision. If she had been healthy, if they'd had biological children, this capital would have passed to those children. The school would likely have remained a small charitable side project, but her death and their lack of direct heirs transformed private capital into public property. Her emptiness, the children she could never bear, filled the lives of thousands of other children. Her absence became a presence that shaped countless futures. Part 13. The billionaire who economized on light bulbs. But what happens to High Point during this transformation? The mansion becomes witness to the increasingly strange life of its master after 1918. Milton, having given away $60 million, begins economizing obsessively on trivial personal expenses. He walks through the enormous house, turning off lights in empty rooms to reduce the electric bill. He wears his suits, until they literally shine with age and wear. He refuses to replace shoes until they're nearly falling apart. Here's the paradox in full display. A man who feeds, clothes, and educates thousands of children lives in a ghost mansion, feeling like a stranger in the very house he commissioned. The grandeur of High Point begins suffocating him. The luxurious dining room with its capacity for dozens of guests sits empty. Crystal chandeliers gather dust. Marble fireplaces stand cold. All of this was created for a life with Kitty. Without her, these expensive objects lose their meaning entirely. They become mere props in a theatrical production that ended long ago. During the 1920s, Milton increasingly abandons the house. He travels to Cuba, where he builds another entire town and massive sugar mills. He's attempting to outrun the silence of High Point. Each time he returns to Pennsylvania, he feels the walls closing in a bit more. By the end of the decade, the situation becomes psychologically unbearable. The massive mansion requires enormous resources for maintenance, a full staff of servants, heating costs, continuous repairs. For Milton, who now counts every penny as money belonging to orphans rather than himself, this becomes a profound moral problem. How can he live like royalty when these resources could fund new dormitories for the school? How can he justify this extravagance when boys under his care need education and medical treatment? Part 14. The Voluntary Abdication. 1. The denouement of the relationship between the man and his mansion arrives. Milton Hershey makes a decision that permanently ends High Point's history as a private living space. He's 73 years old. He's utterly alone. He's exhausted by the echo of his own footsteps in 22 empty rooms. He summons the management of the local country club with an extraordinary proposal. Take the house. Transform it into a clubhouse for golfers. Leave me a small apartment on the second floor where I can live quietly. This seems like madness. Give a palace over to locker rooms and a restaurant? Squeeze yourself into a couple of rooms while strangers fill your home? But for Milton, it represents liberation. He's shedding the stage set, the performance of wealth. He keeps only bare necessities. Some of Kitty's furniture, her personal items, her memory. Everything else is packed away or remains as part of the club's interior, turning into museum exhibits while their original owner is still alive. This is how the final act begins. The Great Chocolate King, a living legend, a man whose name appears on millions of product wrappers worldwide, voluntarily becomes a tenant in his own mansion. Downstairs on the first floor, golfers drink cocktails and laugh. They discuss their games. They complain about business. They live entirely foreign lives. That space thrives with activity. Upstairs in a modest room, an old man sits by the window looking down at his factory and the school that grows larger every year. He has systematically renounced his right to own everything. First the factory and the money, now finally his own home. But this renunciation isn't defeat. It's the highest form of freedom he's ever known. Part 15. The Final Sleep. October 13th, 1945. A hospital room in the town of Hershey. In a small plain room, a man who permanently changed humanity's relationship with sweetness is dying. He's 88 years old. On his bedside table, there are no gold watches or stock certificates. There's only one photograph, Kitty, young and smiling, taken during the happy years before her illness revealed itself. Milton Hershey passes away as quietly as he lived his final years, without ceremony, without fanfare. He left no personal accounts in Swiss banks. No yachts are docked in Monaco under his name. At the moment of death, his personal net worth is surprisingly modest for a man of his historical stature. Everything he earned already belonged to others. He died owning almost nothing, having given away almost everything. But what became of High Point? That palace on the hill that he abandoned to live in an apartment above golfers? Part 16. The Ultimate Irony. If you travel to Hershey, Pennsylvania today in 2025, you'll see this noble mansion still standing. It continues rising above the town, a monument from the Gilded Age when industrial titans built structures to rival European nobility. Its limestone facade remains flawless. The gardens are meticulously maintained. The building hasn't crumbled into one of America's many forgotten mansions, abandoned testaments to old money dynasties that squandered their wealth. But its purpose has changed in the most paradoxical way imaginable. Today, High Point serves as headquarters for the Hershey Trust Company, the nerve center of one of the world's wealthiest charitable organizations. Here, in the very rooms where childless marriage once echoed with silence, decisions are now made that influence the destinies of thousands of children. The irony reaches the scale of classical Greek tragedy. A house built for a family that couldn't have children now manages capital that provides for over 2,000 foster children annually. Kitty's bedroom, where she faded from illness, and Milton's study, where he signed away his fortune, are now offices for people who manage a fund exceeding $20 billion. $20 billion. This sum exceeds the budgets of numerous small nations. It dwarfs the endowments of most prestigious universities. And all this money serves one purpose that Milton and Kitty defined in 1909: to give homes to those who have none. Part 17. The System That Cannot Be Destroyed. Milton Hershey achieved something remarkable and rare. He created a business structure protected from pure greed. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, financial corporations have repeatedly attempted to acquire or absorb the Hershey Company. They've offered astronomical sums that would make most shareholders immediately wealthy. But every single time, they encounter an insurmountable barrier. The controlling block of voting shares belongs to the trust, and the trust is legally obligated to follow Milton's will. The profits must flow to the school. The chocolate must serve the children. In essence, the dead hand of Milton Hershey still manages this empire from beyond the grave. He didn't just leave money in a will. He left a legal architecture, an ironclad system. His instructions were written so skillfully by his attorneys that even 80 years after his death, no corporate raider can dismantle his utopia for the sake of quick profit. The story of High Point and Milton Hershey functions as a mirror image of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, but with a profoundly different ending. Like Gatsby, Milton built a castle for love. Like Gatsby, he attempted to use accumulated wealth to rewrite reality, to overcome the cruelties of fate through sheer financial force. But where Gatsby was ultimately destroyed by his impossible dream, Hershey discovered an escape route through the radical renunciation of ownership. He understood a truth that remains inaccessible to most billionaires. Money isn't a goal, it's fertilizer. If you simply hoard it, it begins to rot and stink like manure piled in a corner. But if you scatter it properly, with intention, it can grow a garden that outlives you by generations. Part 18. The Garden That Still Blooms. And this garden is absolutely real, not metaphorical. The Hershey Gardens that Milton founded continue blooming today, expanded far beyond his original vision. The rose garden he created specifically for Kitty now covers 23 acres. Thousands of visitors walk through it annually. But few tourists taking photographs against the backdrop of these flowers understand that every bush represents a monument to one woman's pain and one man's love. Every bloom is a living memorial to what couldn't be and what became instead. Part 19. The Lesson for Our Age. What does this story teach us today in an era when success is measured by Instagram followers and bank account balances? Milton Hershey offers a completely different metric for measuring a life. A legacy isn't what you leave for yourself. Monuments with your name carved in stone, towers with your brand displayed on top. A true legacy is what you leave behind when your name no longer matters to you because you're gone. Milton could have remained in history simply as another chocolate king, just another rich man like Rockefeller or Carnegie or Vanderbilt. His name would appear in business textbooks as a footnote about early 20th century industrial consolidation. But he became something more. He became a father to thousands of children he never personally met. Every graduate of the Milton Hershey School represents a living continuation of his existence. Every child rescued from poverty thanks to chocolate profits constitutes a victory over the dirt and hopelessness into which Milton himself was born in 1857. High Point stands physically intact but emotionally empty. No one sleeps in Kitty's bedroom anymore. No fire warms her sitting room. But the building isn't dead. It's filled with meaning denser than any physical matter. Part 20. What you're really buying. When you next unwrap a Hershey's chocolate bar in its distinctive brown wrapper, pause for a moment. You're holding in your hands not just candy. You're holding a small brick of an enormous fortress constructed on a foundation of love and loss. You're not paying for cocoa beans and sugar. You're financing the most grandiose attempt of one man to correct the universe's injustices. You're contributing to a system designed to save children who, like Milton once was, have nothing. The sweet taste of chocolate is merely a disguise, a pleasant coating. Inside is a bitter story about how the greatest achievements in this world are created not from abundance of happiness, but from attempts to fill a void that can never truly be filled by anything else. Last part, the photograph in his pocket. Milton Hershey died with only a photograph of his wife in his pocket. No other possession seemed important enough to keep close during his final moments. But he left behind a world that became measurably warmer than the one he entered. He left behind a self-sustaining system that continues rescuing children from circumstances that would otherwise destroy them. He left behind a town, a company, a school, and a philosophy. And perhaps that represents the only genuine success available to a mortal human being. Not the accumulation of wealth that will be dispersed within a generation or two, but the creation of a self-perpetuating system of care that continues functioning long after your name is forgotten by everyone except historians. High Point still stands on its hill above the town, a noble mansion from the Gilded Age. It represents both the zenith of one man's ambition and the nadir of his personal happiness. It's simultaneously a monument to love and a memorial to loss, a palace and a prison, a dream realized and a dream destroyed. The building has been repurposed, the rooms filled with new people pursuing new purposes. But if you stand quietly in what was once Kitty's bedroom, now an office with computers and filing cabinets, you can almost feel the presence of two people who once believed that wealth could purchase happiness, who learned the hardest possible way that it cannot, and who ultimately discovered that wealth's only real purpose is to be given away to those who need it more than you ever did. This is the true story of High Point, not a tale of architectural splendor or industrial triumph, but a deeply human story about what we build, what we lose, what we keep, and what we're forced to let go. It's a story that echoes through every gilded manor and forgotten mansion across this country, a reminder that buildings outlast the love that created them. But sometimes, if you're extraordinarily fortunate and intentional, the purpose behind that love can outlast even the buildings themselves. In the end, Milton Snavely Hershey didn't just build a chocolate empire, he didn't just construct a model industrial town, he didn't just erect a magnificent mansion on a Pennsylvania hilltop. He built a system that transforms private grief into public good, that converts personal loss into collective gain, that takes the absence of children who were never born and turns it into the presence of thousands of children who were given chances they never would have had otherwise. That's the real palace that love built, not the limestone structure on High Point, beautiful as it is, but the invisible architecture of care and intention that continues sheltering vulnerable children more than a century after Milton and Kitty signed the papers that started it all. And that palace, unlike the physical mansion, will never be abandoned, will never be forgotten, and will never fall silent as long as there are children who need what Milton and Kitty wanted to give their own children, but never could: a home, an education, a chance, a future. The story of High Point is ultimately not about a building at all. It's about transformation, the transformation of pain into purpose, of loss into legacy, of private sorrow into public blessing. It's about how the greatest monuments we can leave behind aren't made of stone and mortar, but of systems and intentions that continue doing good work long after we're gone. Milton Hershey understood this, finally, after losing everything that mattered to him personally. And in understanding it, he created something that matters to thousands of people who never knew his name, never saw his face, never walked through the rooms of High Point, but whose lives were fundamentally changed because one man decided that his fortune existed not to glorify himself, but to rescue others from the poverty he once knew.